Hey everybody, and welcome back to Front-End Expert. In this video, we will be discussing function currying, or creating curried versions of functions. And what we're discussing here is how we can take a function like the simple sum function, and the goal is to create a new version of the function, so to transform this function so that each parameter is its own function call. So right now you can see we are calling sum with the parameters 1, 4, and 10. But the curried version of this function would be if we could console.log sum of 1 and then call that as a function with 4 as its parameter and call that as a function with 10 as its parameter. So of course this isn't going to work just yet, so I will comment this out for later, and let's see how we can make a curried version of the sum function. Let's come down here and make a new function, and we will call this one curried sum, and we want curried sum to simply take the parameter of just the first value. So in this case, let's take the value of a. Okay, so now what do we need to do in this function? Well, the goal was to be able to call it as a function, which means we need to return a function. So what we're going to do is return a function. And this function took in one parameter. It took in the number 4 in this case, which is our letter b. So we can take in the argument of b. And now in this function, which is the sum1, 4, we call it as a function as well, and it also takes one parameter. So that means inside of this function, we will also return another function. And this one takes in the parameter c. And now this was the end of our function chain, and we were able to just call the function. So that means here, all we need to do is actually return the value. So we can return, and we can say a plus b plus c. And due to the closures created, all 3 of these variables are still in scope inside of this innermost function. So now if we uncomment out this code and call it curried sum instead of sum, this code should work. And you can see that we get 15 in both of our outputs for both sum and curried sum. Now we can also create a function to do this for us. So let's create another function, and let's call this function curry. And what function curry is going to do is it's going to take in a function as a parameter and return a curried version of it. And specifically, it's going to take in a function that has 3 different arguments to it, and it's going to create a curried version of it. So inside of this function, what we need to do is return function, and this function will essentially be the outermost function we had here. So we can actually just copy all of this code and paste it into here, and now we have this function curry that returns a new function, and all we need to do is change what it does at the innermost level. And instead of returning a plus b plus c, which was sort of hard coding in this idea of the curried sum, instead we can return a call to func, so our passed in function, with a, b, and c. And now what we can do is instead of calling curried sum here, so we can get rid of this code, then we can come down here and create curried sum, but as a constant. So we can say const curried sum and set this equal to the curry function, passing in the sum function as its parameter. And when we run this, you'll see we get 15 again. So this function is just creating that curried sum function, but it's more generic. So this would work for any function with 3 arguments. So for example, let's create another function, and this one could be subtract, and maybe what it does is it subtracts b from a, and then it subtracts c from the result there. And we can create a curried subtract function, so const curried subtract, in the same way that we created curried sum. So we can call curry of the subtract function, and now we can use this just like we can use our curried sum function. So we can come down here and say console.log of curried subtract and pass in, let's say, the same values, so 1, 4, and 10. And now when I run this code, you'll see we subtract those values from each other, and we get -13. And we can also simplify this a little bit more. So let's take our curry function and change it to use arrow functions instead. So what we can do is instead of returning this function keyword, we can create arrow functions. And we can do this for all 3. So on function with the argument of b, we will make an arrow function, and then one final arrow function here. But then we can take this even one step further, and we can use implicit returns. So we can get rid of the curly braces because each of these functions is just a single line. So we can go all the way up like this, and all we have to do is do return, and then we have this line of arrow functions, and then the final function that we want to return, and then we can clean up these curly braces as well. And this is going to do roughly the same thing, so you can see we get the same output. And now you might be asking the question, why would I want to do this? Why would I not want to just call the sum function or the subtract function? And the answer is most of the time you don't want to be doing this. Most of the time you should just call functions using their standard syntax. But there are times when we want a curried function, and one of the use cases for this can be when we want to have a function that is sort of part of another function. So for example, what if we wanted a function that adds two numbers and it adds them to some other number? So for example, if we wanted a function that is going to be add 4. So we could define that by saying function add 4, and we give this the values b and c, and it would return 4 plus b plus c. And in this simple case, this is fine. But with a curried function, we can make this way simpler. So instead what we can do is come down below the creation of the curried sum, and we can say const add 4 and set this equal to curried sum of 4, because of the fact that curried sum of 4 returns a function. So now we can say console.log add 4, and let's say we pass in the value 10, and then the value 10 again, and now we will get the value of 24 because we are adding 4 to these values. So it allows you to save portions of a function call with certain parameters in a nice, clean, concise way. Now you might occasionally see different versions of this curried function implementation depending on how many parameters you want to accept, or maybe if you want to do something special with the this context. But for the most part, this is the implementation that we will end up using for basic curried functions, and it can be a nice pattern to follow when you need something like this add 4 function we had here. So with that, that's going to be the end of this video on function currying. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.